So the daughter says, "Did you hear what I said?" The mother says, "Yes, that happened to me when I was in college too." She goes to another room. The daughter follows her around. Says, "What happened to you in college?" And the mother said, "Well, I got mixed up in evolution. I had a nervous breakdown." Out of the room, she goes to do something else. The daughter comes around. She says, "What happened to nervous breakdown?" "Well," she says, "I couldn't reconcile evolution and my Christian beliefs, and so finally one day I got a book. It explained everything to me." Now, the temptation would be to do what at this point? Explain everything to her. No, you can't. Why? According to our rules we've set up. Have you been asked to say anything else? Most people in contest, this is just fascinating to watch this, somebody will ask a question, and they interpret the fact that you're asking a question as the fact that you must be broadside. So they take every gun they've got and load it and fire at you while they got you in sight. All right, now, the first round of ammunition, does that satisfy the curiosity of the question? I mean, when people ask a question, I'll tell you how much information they want. Approximately a half an inch. In fact, it's just almost a miracle that they would even ask anything. Now, if you give them an inch and they wanted a half an inch, will they close up and retaliate? That's why very few people ask questions anymore. They've had too much jammed at them when they ask the first question. Now, as she walks to another room, the daughter's tired of following her around, so she waits 2 days without saying anything. The mother does what? She knows full well the way the mind works, and so she just waits. Pretty soon, one day, the daughter walks in and she says, "Would you tell me what that book said?" "Well," she says, "you know, in atheism and evolution, there's a problem of gaps." She says, "Does that ever bother you?" And here we're starting to tell her something, and instead we're doing what again? Asking questions. It's a beautiful technique. And the girl says, "Sure, that bothers me, but they're going to find them. They'll solve this problem one of these days. They're digging all the time in all the remains." Well, the mother said, "That bothered me too." And she says, "I found this book, and it showed that at the very gaps in the theory of evolution were the actual acts of creation." It says in the book showed me very plainly how God used evolution within the creative periods. The daughter looks, she says, "That explains a lot." In other words, there's no way a period can overlap another period unless a new act of creation comes in. Now, you can go into this for hours explaining this, but immediately the girl sees that evolution is not in conflict with her Christian beliefs, and that if she stays in evolution, will she have to go on being tortured with doubts, whereas she could do what very quickly now? Move to a positive aura, accept her Christian faith, and what kind of a block, belief or blind, will she build? Well, if somebody took you and drug you down through the rational line and tormented you with all the doubts, and you found out it was all foolishness, and you got back up into a positive aura, would you want that to happen again? Let me give you a correlation here. The older you become, the more fixed in your ways you become, and the bigger the blocks you build. Now, one more correlation. The more knowledge you acquire, the more information that you have, the bigger the block. Because if I have more information, do I have more material to build blocks with? So we say that people who are older, people who learn more, are more stubborn and bullheaded. There are also other people who are younger and who do not know very much. We call them spineless. Open-minded, but open on both ends. And are these people capable of being brainwashed? In other words, the secret to be thrown in a prisoner of war camp without being brainwashed is to build huge blocks where nothing can ever change your mind again. Now, blocks are wonderful if they're above the x-axis. If they're below the x-axis, they do damage to you. So what you should do tonight is destroy all of your blocks below the line and reinforce all of your blocks above the line. Now, so far this evening, we have covered one method of decision making which is based on habit by prejudice, based on a past value system. Then we have the second method, which is based on an actual decision by an evaluative method based on a present value system. Either one of these end up by placing you either in a negative syndrome or in a positive aura. All right, let's carry our diagram of decision-making in the affectional field one step further. And let's assume that I have actually made a decision in the positive aura that this thing is good. And as I'm going up into the positive aura, we say I am increasing at an increasing rate. Whereas I'm thinking that this is a good thing and I'm glad I decided it this way and everything's wonderful. Now, if I continue, eventually I tend to level off. Now, this particular line is actually illustrating a physical item, not a human being. A human being will be a little different. Now, what causes me to level off? Well, number one, I get used to it. This new car becomes common to me. And I lose some of my enthusiasm. The other reason I begin to level off, something goes wrong. The door knob breaks. Little items, it has a few mistakes on it, so I decide it's good, but it's not worth getting excited anymore about than what I already am. So as I level off, I would like to hold it right there and make the item then last forever. But because it's physical, because moth or rust or something gets in and destroys it, and what happens to this car now? The items that are going wrong start picking up. And it starts increasing. And I realize, maybe this thing wasn't God after all, and I begin to drop lower in a positive aura. Now, what I'm really doing every time something goes wrong with the car, am I not questioning my original decision? Maybe this wasn't really the thing to do last winter. Maybe I should have done something else. And maybe that other salesman had a better car. In other words, as the questioning process continues, it drives me right through my block, and it drives me right down to the rational line. And at this point, I'm really evaluating whether I should have the car or whether I shouldn't. And as I think about it, and I'm wondering, have I reached the process of indecisiveness? We're going to designate this point A, and we're going to say that up to point A, I am increasing at an increasing rate, and past point A, I am increasing at a decreasing rate. If you can master this technique, it's going to be wonderful for you, because what am I supposed to do the minute I pass point A with this car? Get rid of it. Can you see this? In other words, with anything material. Now, if you're a lady here tonight and you have a closet full of dresses, ask yourself, are there any dresses in there that I have not worn in the past 2 or 3 months? Now, what should you do with them? Give them to Goodwill. Get rid of them. There's a vacuum law that as long as you keep them there, nothing else will be there. You can get rid of them, the closet will fill up again with something that's usable. All right, now, if at point A, I purchase a new item, I want to show you what will happen. I will come up higher. So that at point A, instead of going into increasing at a decreasing rate, I just shift to a new item and continue increasing at an increasing rate. And have I gone into a place of indecisiveness? I haven't had to evaluate in terms of negativism yet, because what do I think about the old car? Pretty good, isn't it? Am I negative on the old one? All the way through the entire evening, the higher you can keep yourself above this x-axis, the happier you're going to be. Because every time you get down near the x-axis, you're going to go into a negative syndrome. Even if you're just evaluating, are you going into a negative syndrome? I think this is a nice rule to know. Every moment I spend in a negative syndrome is death. Even if it's only for a second, I'm killed for that much of my life. Now, before we go on, I'd like to show you what happens as I continue down past the rational line. I don't have to really evaluate very much when I hit the rational line, do I? I mean, I already know this car is no good. I'm keeping it for some other reason. Now, as I pass the rational line, the first thing below the rational line is evaluation. And is there anything wrong with evaluating in our economy today? If I were to ask you before we started this seminar, is evaluation a good word or a bad word, every one of you would tell me it's a good word. We're convinced it's a good word, but evaluation means basically that I'm doing what to this object? I'm trying to find out what's wrong with it. But now I'm not doing it really derogatory, I just want to know. So we say that I have cut into the negative syndrome just enough to evaluate. And I look and I see, you know, there are some things wrong with this car, and I'm a little more broad-minded now, and I'll make a little better decisions in the future. Then I decide, you know, let's evaluate some more. Now, as I draw my wedge deeper, have I moved into a different kind of emotion? And the emotion will be constructive criticism. And then I'm rather pleased, because I understand now that I'm valuable to society because I'm a critic. I wouldn't dare criticize for a derogatory reason. I mean, I don't believe in that. In other words, I'm doing it only to help people. Now, what is constructive criticism? It's when I look for something wrong in you with the hopes that when I find it, I can tell you about it and you can fix it up or repair it and you'll be better. In other words, I have examined you and there's something wrong and it's something you can fix. All right, now I have found out that the paint is chipped. Can we give it a new paint job? So I decide through constructive criticism we should give it a new paint job. By the way, does this prove that constructive criticism now is good? This just inspires me to do what? Look for something else. Now, I want to make my wedge a little bigger on my constructive criticism. And by the way, watch right here in the area that I'm going to designate as S and T. This is constructive criticism, and in order to add the areas S and T, I end up with R. And R is plain criticism. Now, this is not so hard to get into, because as I look for something wrong in you and I find 4 things that we can fix, the odds say that probably what's the 5th one going to be? You can't fix. Now, can I only find things that we can repair when I look for something wrong? Or am I looking for things wrong at random? So I really, in constructive criticism, the first 10 things I find wrong with you, could it be that even though my motive was constructive, the first 10 were all plain criticism? Because all criticism is to evaluate and find something that you can't do anything about. But eventually I do find something that there's nothing on earth you can do about. Now, after I tell you, and you tell me you can't do anything about it, do I feel a little bad? I'm sorry that I brought your attention to this, since there's nothing we can do about it, but I'll make it up to you. How? I'll go back and evaluate and try to find some other things that you can do more about. So I'm going to drive a bigger wedge, and it's interesting, as I go deeper into negative syndrome, on both sides of R, I pick up U and V. Am I finding more things wrong with you that we can't do anything about? Now, the collection of U, R, and V lead me to form my next level in the negative syndrome of doubt. By the time I have evaluated the car, until I have U, R, and V of things that we can't do anything about this car. In other words, these are the dear friends that have really been constructive in their criticism of you, eventually want to do what with you? Well, we don't really need you in our friendship circle anymore. We have doubts that you're really worthy to be human. In other words, I really thought you were a wonderful person to start out. But I mean, after what all I've discovered lately, I'm not so sure that we should be associating with each other anymore. We say then, I begin to doubt you, and I doubt you for what purpose? Because I have criticized you. And I criticized you because I wanted to help you. Well, the next time somebody's offering you constructive criticism, just realize that our friendship is going to be a very short one. In other words, we're not going to be loving each other much longer. In other words, it's coming to an abrupt halt. By the way, on this car, the doubt here is what now? When you find so many things about your car that it's not worth it to fix, what's your doubt? You begin to doubt whether you should keep it. If I really doubt whether I should keep it or not, then the only way to solve the doubt is to get more information, right? So does that mean a bigger wedge? So I evaluate more, I have more constructive criticism, I have more criticism, and what happens to my doubts now? And by the way, as I go down the negative syndrome, am I increasing in intensity? And the next thing in actual intensity is suspicion. A beautiful illustration of this is a furnace in your home. You just try this on a furnace. Just begin to evaluate it. In other words, eventually that furnace is going to do what? Blow up. Eventually that car is going to be the death of you. And what about the friend now that you've been helping? Well, I've just discovered enough things about him to know he's not safe. He will damage my character. So at the point of suspicion, the best thing to do now is to get rid of what we started out to make better. And we did it logically, didn't we? Common sense, and all the way down to suspicion, were the motives and the intents honorable? In other words, people end up in a negative syndrome with good intentions. In other words, you don't go down this because you're mean and ornery. You end up here because you're trying desperately to help somebody. I like you. And if we could figure out a way we could associate together without being seen, we might still carry on a little longer. Because after all, didn't I start out with good motives at the top? Now, the thing I'd like for you to realize is that 2/3 of our population are neurotic, are below the rational line. I want you to see, the rational approach to life is what? The most logical thing in the world to do is to go down the steps we've just covered. And it destroys whatever the relationship is or whatever the item is. It ends it for you. Now, when I get down this far, I don't know really what to do with you because I'm too involved just to tell you to get out of my life. And I try to figure out what should I do. And then, before I know it, I've driven the wedge a little deeper because I've really got to find out everything about you now. I mean, if we're going to go so drastic a situation as getting a divorce, I better discover everything. So in the process of doing this, we go so deep in the negative syndrome, we get into the next area, and this particular area is going to be called greed. Now, I like to go through my typical illustration of the apple pie. If I'm suspicious of you, and there's a pie in the refrigerator, and I've eaten 5 of the 6 pieces, what do I think is going to happen? You're going to get it. Now, what can I do about the situation? I can't eat it. If I could, I would, but I can't. I'm full. 2 hours from now, I will. But what will happen in those 2 hours? You'll get it. So I take it to my bedroom underneath my bed. Am I greedy?
You're crazy.
You know, that's interesting that you would say I'm crazy, because anytime you go below the rational line, you're crazy. We can define insanity tonight as anything in the negative syndrome is insanity. Now you say, do I say 2/3 of our population are insane? We only commit 10%, you know. The rest are loose. In other words, we're saying that you are disturbed if you're neurotic. And we do have approximately 56% of our population neurotic. Let's say now, after I've got the pie securely hid underneath the bed, and I'm laying on the bed to protect it, you knock on the door. I want to show you how really insane I am. The minute I hear you, what do I think? By the way, you came up to share some good news that I just discovered oil. This is what you're going to come up to tell me. I know, what are you going to do? You only got one thing in your mind. You want the pie. So when you walk into the room, no matter where your eyes look, where do I think they look? If I'm suspicious, can I think almost anything now? In other words, my greed then increases, does it not? Then I begin to say, I wished I had have eaten it. Even though I was full, that would have been the safest thing to do, because now I'm getting into more trouble. Watch, I'm in quicksand now and I can't stop it because my wedge is going to go deeper. The next feeling I run into is jealousy. Jealousy is always the result of greed. In other words, I am very jealous of you now because I know you're out to get me. And you're out to take the very last thing I have away from me. And always remember, jealousy always involves a scarcity. How many pieces of pie do we have? Only one now. Now, am I uncomfortable with you in the room? I just as soon you would go. So, jealousy causes me to end up with an obnoxious feeling. The obnoxious feeling turns into hatred. You cannot be jealous of somebody without hating them. So now I hate you. I even hate you for being here, don't I? If you could just get out of here, I mean, why do you have to be here? And you keep talking and talking. Do I only want to hear anything you've got to say? Because do we have a relationship between people? Not anymore. Now, pretty soon, without realizing it, my hatred has turned to fear. Anytime I hate something for a very long period of time, I become fearful of it. Halfway through, you begin to reach a sort of a paralysis. A lot of people think fear motivates, but does it? No, in other words, if I increase the fear, do I increase the paralysis? If I give you a lot of fear, you can't move. Fear always turns into paralysis. And then it turns into indifference or the vegetable. And then I say, I could care less. Go ahead if you're going to stay in my room the rest of the night. Eat the pie. And you say, what pie? I rip the cover off the bed and I says, there it is, you knew all the time. Are you beginning to see, is this kind of bizarre behavior? This is mental illness. The first symptoms of mental illness begin just below constructive criticism. And we say that the criticism and the doubt area represent neurotic behavior. You go a little lower, and the suspicion gives me my first symptoms of paranoia. If I go a little bit deeper, when I go into jealousy and hatred and fear, I run into some type of schizophrenic behavior, and then I go a little deeper into actual indifference, and I go into psychological withdrawal. In other words, if all of your affectional fields were averaged out, and they averaged at these different points, then we would say you would have this mental illness. In other words, if you averaged tonight every one of your affectional fields at indifference, would you be a vegetable? Because everything you could think of in your mind, you could care less, then we say you would turn into a vegetable. Now, the lowest we can go on the totem pole is indifference, because when I reach indifference, I don't care whether you were born or not now. When I reach indifference for my pie, I don't care whether it was ever pie or not. And there it is. It's as simple as ABC. This is exactly the route of the negative person. Let's do one quick illustration to show you how this works. Let's take the two gangsters that escaped a few years ago. I think it was just last year. And you remember the time that they shot the policeman in Springfield? So let's follow them on our negative syndrome. Now, in jail, they are normally living in doubt, and they're living in suspicion. Now, they escape at this point. By the way, a lot of times when you put them in jail, they go down to indifference. But after they're in jail for a while, they work their way back up to doubt. You've got to be almost at the level of doubt if you're capable of escaping. Right? These men escaped at doubt, and they walked around on the streets, and they immediately went into the position of suspicion because of the stress. Now, this means that they looked at every single human being that looked at them, and they thought, what about you, if you were looking at them? They knew that you knew. By the way, did the people know? Nobody in town knew who they were. Now, how would you feel, though, if you're walking around town thinking everybody who looked at you knows exactly that you just escaped? Do I have real suspicion here? Now, for the greed part, they're afraid of what now? Recapture. In other words, do they have very much free time? Now, can you compare the amount of free time they have with the pie? There's not much left, and if you keep looking at them a little longer, you're going to report them and they're not going to have anything left. And so they become jealous of you. The same as the guys in the bedroom looking at the pie, they are on the street looking at them, and do they get the same feelings? All right, this naturally pushes them down. And it's interesting to know they went from suspicion to hatred from Portland to Eugene. At the point of hatred, could you shoot a policeman for no cause? All right, which they did, whom they killed. Now they proceeded on down south, and they ended up at Fear in Sacramento. Now anybody knows that if you want to escape, and you're going through the Rogue River country, what should you do? What a place to hide. Whereas a gangster who escapes in Sacramento, what does he want to do? Get up into the woods country, right? Now, do these men think very well when they drive out of the Rogue River country right into Sacramento? Now, with Fear, they've got to find a hostage. So they decide, well, you've got to get somebody important. So they kidnap the finance director for the state of California. Now, what's this going to do to the whole situation? Well, immediately does the world know about it now? In other words, in the newspapers all over are carrying the story. But now, why do you have to have a hostage? Because of Fear. Did they need a hostage in Eugene? No, no hostages were needed in Eugene, but now, because of Fear, they have to have a hostage. All right, now, as they cross the border from California into Nevada, and as they shoot it out all over the place with bullets in the cars and everything, what can you predict is going to happen? And by the way, right while I was hearing the reports on the radio, I predicted exactly what was going to happen. That they would go into a state of indifference and become a vegetable. Let me show you what they did. They told their hostage, we don't need you anymore, would you get out? Now, by the way, in Sacramento, did they need him? Just a few hours later, they don't need them. Now, they give their guns away. Did they need guns now? No. It's interesting to know that when they went clear into indifference, did they need a car anymore? Give the car away, and they're walking along on Route 40 back toward Sacramento. They don't even know where they're at or what they're doing. They have no guns, no car, no hostage. Do they care now? Could care less. In other words, there's nothing anymore because they've reached indifference. By the way, the police picked them up at a place where I have ridden horseback over the hills, and there are abandoned mines. It's an ideal place if you really wanted to hide out. But what do? Walk right down the freeway, and the police pulls up and says, would you get in? They says, anything you want, sir. Very gentlemanlike. What a capture. And he takes them back to Sacramento. Do they follow our pattern? And by the way, once they started from doubt, could they stop it? Criminals should study this before they try their brakes. I don't want to spend any more time on negative syndrome. I just want you to know that it's there. These are the emotions. And I'd also like for you to know that there is no reality there.